Hello, and welcome back to the Sherry Sylvester Show. We're wrapping up the legislative session in Austin this week, and there's so much to say about what happened. But today I want to focus on an issue that we're only beginning to look at. What is happening to merit and standards in our medical schools? Texas passed comprehensive higher education reforms both in 2023 and again this session that reinstituted merit and made it the only priority for admitting students and hiring faculty. Senate Bill 37 passed this session, and it will return power to the boards of regents and create protocols that will expand curriculum review beyond the faculty to include regents. It will also end the tyranny of faculty senates on Texas campuses. For the most part, Texas medical schools have ignored these reforms. The American Alliance for Equal Rights recently sued the University of Texas at Austin over its research program called Black Epistemologies, which aims to foster racial equity in STEM for all Black people. And at UT Southwest, a number of DEI and race-based programs are still in place. I want to talk about those issues and others with one of my colleagues here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, Dr. Cliff Porter. Dr. Porter is an MD and a PhD. He's a primary and urgent care physician and one of the founders of Texas Direct Medical Care. He is one of a growing number of physicians leaving corporate and government health care to work to reform medicine and restore freedom and control to both patients and physicians. Prior to that, Dr. Porter was a medical director for several urgent care clinics in Travis County. He's a retired colonel with 30 years of service in the Reserves, the Regular Army, and the Texas Army National Guard, including deployment to Iraq. Prior to his medical career, Dr. Porter taught history and philosophy, writing on ideologies and totalitarianism. Cliff, thank you so much for coming downstairs and joining me on the podcast. Great to have you here today.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
So, tell me about your life. How did you weren't originally a doctor, you were a teacher. What happened? How did that happen?
Well, there's the war on terrorism. You may have heard about that in the news a few years ago.
Right.
And I was working as an analyst at an organization, and then when I was mobilized in the reserve, the civilian job was downsized. Mm-hmm. They weren't allowed to do that. That's a whole other story. A boring chapter in my fictional autobiography.
Uh-huh.
But that gave me the opportunity. The Army actually gave me the opportunity to actually go to med school. Mm-hmm. And so I took that opportunity, and that traveled me around from Virginia to Washington, El Paso, at mm-hmm. Fort Bliss, and then finally to Fort Hood. They offered to move me again, and I thought, I like it here in Texas. So I decided to stay. So a long story short, I tell people my life story is I went from Socrates to Hippocrates.
That's great. And where are you native? Where are you from?
Missouri originally.
Uh-huh. So you got into the military from there?
I was actually in California at the time.
Oh, okay.
And so unexpectedly bounced around and very, very happy for where I've landed here.
So what have you been working on this session in terms of medical school reform? I know that it has been a priority for Chairman Brandon Creighton, Republican from Conroe in the House, to look at DEI in our medical schools. But we didn't make a lot of progress this session, did we?
We did not in terms of medical schools. There's other DEI initiatives that have been beaten back to stop that. I call it Orwellian Marxist racism, and the terminology is so mixed up in just strange, perverse ways. Well, a lot of that has been put back, but as you stated in the introduction, so many places are just ignoring it in the medical schools. In the practice of medicine, we really don't see the DEI stuff in private practice, because when people come in for a clinic, whatever, high blood pressure, sprained ankles, whatever it might be, as we say, Mother Nature doesn't care about all the politics. People come in with a pathology, and you treat that pathology. In med schools, which are very ivory tower, there's an effort to really restrict people's thinking to fit that ideology. And, of course, it really does harm medicine. Now, several things we pushed forward, and this session had a lot of compressed time, and there were some other changes that really made it hard as the time ran out on getting some bills forwarded. At least we started presenting up these ideas. We need to address this in medicine. And one late idea came to us was that a lot of schools aren't doing the Hippocratic Oath anymore, which is really quite shocking. I tell patients, yes, most places don't do the Hippocratic Oath. Patients expect physicians, nurses, the whole healthcare profession, they expect the Hippocratic Oath standards being held.
Remind us what it is. I know it's do no harm, but remind us the whole background behind it.
Well, the Hippocratic Oath.
Who was Hippocrates?
Hippocrates was the great Greek philosopher of medicine, and had written on it and established schools on medical care. The Hippocratic Oath is actually a prayer to Greek gods on practicing medicine correctly. So those Greek gods, we don't pray to those anymore, but nonetheless, the principles are established. And in a simple way, it is we practice medicine for the purpose of treating our patients, not for personal gain, not for politics, not for ideology, reading a little bit into it. But the original one quite clearly states, we are not going to do harm, we're not going to do things, use our medical skills for nefarious purposes. So over the years, this had been rediscovered, some of their Hippocratic writings during the Renaissance and period, and a lot of it then started coming back into modern education in the medieval period. Remember, I was a historian, so I still love these old things. I live in the past still, somewhat. In the 20th century, the idea of reinstituting the Hippocratic Oath to give us ethical standard to students as the profession or the education of medicine coming out of medieval witchcraft, as it were, into a more professional scientific foundation. So the Hippocratic Oath sets the medical ethical standards for how you treat other people. And it's quite simply, we don't do it for personal gain. We do it for the good of our patient. We're not going to do treatments that harm the patient if we don't want to violate our fiduciary responsibilities. Also, part of it had to do with the not giving people, the various terms, tinctures and potions and poisons, to also cause harm or death or even induce an abortion. Well, in the 70s, 60s, and 70s time period, people, for political reasons, of course, the pro-choice and pro-abortion advocates wanted to change the Hippocratic Oath because the Hippocratic Oath states no abortion. So it started to change. Then over the course of the next couple generations, to the point where people have changed the Hippocratic Oath from being about the patient to being about social justice, which can mean anything they want.
Right.
So now political ideology now starts interfering in the medical care. Simple examples are during the HIV and AIDS crisis, when it first started to develop in the 80s, there was demands that the Hippocratic Oath be held up because some people would refuse to treat someone with HIV and AIDS because they're worried about catching a potentially fatal infection. Well, the duty of any physician, just go back to the bubonic plague, the Black Death, is the duty of the physician and healthcare professionals to take care of their people, even at personal risk. So, of course, that went away. Well, with COVID, for example, we actually saw people refusing to treat other people if they wouldn't get vaccinated. Or they're refusing to treat people if they didn't have the right political ideology, and we actually saw this. Very shockingly, in Australia, two nurses who were anti-Israeli actually caused early death of some Jewish patients in the hospital. So it's such a complete violation of everything that medicine stands for.
And I think that when you're talking about the priority being the patients, I know I've talked with Dr. Stanley Goldfarb, who is the head of Do No Harm, and one of the things it looks like that they were trying to do at the University of Texas is increase the number of African American doctors, which everyone supports.
Right.
But you can't do that by lowering the requirements to get into medical school. It still has to be based on merit. And Dr. Goldfarb talks about this phony research that African American patients would do better if they were treated by black doctors. No research that shows that at all.
Correct.
It's just like the rest of us. We want the best doctor. We really don't care what color he or she is or what their ethnicity is. And in the world today, in Texas today, I've got a bunch of doctors. They're all different ethnicities.
Well, what I see quite often at especially when I was working in various low-income urgent care clinics, I see people from all over the world in different ways. What they wanted, in one sense, is, can someone understand my language?
Sure.
That's not a cultural piece. That's just so they could be understood. They wanted great medical care, regardless. And as I said, Mother Nature doesn't care. These people want good care. Politics seems to go away when someone comes in with pneumonia or the COVID, sprained joints, whatever the case may be. They want good treatment. And all that politics quite often goes away when you're sick. I like to say, I like nice visitors come to my clinic, but no one wants to come visit me on purpose. Yeah. It's usually because they have to.
So do we need, I know that one of the pieces of legislation that some of us were advocating this last session was that medical schools would provide actual grades rather than pass-fail. Do we need to add the Hippocratic Oath to that? Do you think that needs to come back in? And then tell me what you think about the pass-fail.
Yes, in fact, both. I think having a Hippocratic Oath standard be a part of it reinforces the foundation of medical ethics. And I think Texas medical schools should do that because it puts the patient first, which all patients expect. Absolutely. So that could very much put on it. The various, left-wing racist views, the DEI and before that CRT and woke and before that was politically correct, keeps being, it's like a retread, the various viewpoints. Putting politics before someone's health is actually causing harm. So it really must be addressed. The Hippocratic Oath, in many ways, establishes what is the purpose of of medicines to serve an individual. After all, what is individual rights? That is our foundation of our society in the United States, is individuality, not what group you belong to. That occurred in other parts of the world. You have rights only if you belong to a certain group. We have rights because they are inalienable. I read that from a guy once upon a time. Yeah, Tom Jefferson and so forth. Now, with the Hippocratic Oath, in many ways, is a barrier to prevent political infiltration into medicine. And you could write it in many ways to meet certain standards. We use several different ones. One is beneficence, doing good. One is non-maleficence, which means essentially do no harm. But also other parts that are autonomy. So it is ultimately the individual's decision how they're going to be treated. And that very much speaks to what it is to be a Texan, one reason I like being here. Now, the standards, the education standards and having grades actually really are important because not having it, just a simple pass or fail, allows some of these well-intended, political ideas from being able to brush over what ultimately some people are incapable of doing, is achieving higher standards. You want to know who's doing well. And as Representative Bonin and Olson were talking on the floor, talking about some
Representative Greg Bonin from Beaumont, where is he from? And Representative Alverson from Cyprus, both physicians who serve in the legislature.
Yes, and one's a neurosurgeon, the other one's a anesthesiologist.
Right.
And they're talking about, well, who do you want to do your brain surgery, not to put too fine of a point on it? Do you want someone who just passed, or do you want someone who actually is much more at top of their class? And of course you want the top of your class. And you cannot know that if it's simple pass or fail. Then it becomes, and we saw this in other parts of education as well, when you start watering down the standards, then you're having people who just aren't quite capable making these decisions. And then it becomes very subjective who's going to accept in one type of residency the specialty training, whether it's neurosurgeon, family medicine, which is what I do, emergency medicine, specialties, cardiology, for example. If it's based on who you know, now you've actually politicized medicine and you've actually worsened medical standards. Again, Mother Nature's, someone's medical condition is irrespective of someone's politics. You want to take care of it quite clearly.
I'm assuming you would agree with me on this. I mean, we want every Texan to have access to university education, and certainly our professional schools as well. But I believe that the way to do that is what we've been doing here at TPPF for the last year, which is expanding school choice.
Yes.
Because part of the problem with some of our minority and marginalized kids is that they're trapped in failing schools. The number of kids that can do math, African-American kids that can do math, is below 10%. So of course you're going to have a very small pool to recruit from in STEM programs. And it seems to me that that's where the emphasis has got to be. You can't correct that
It takes a long time
at the
to
college
train.
level.
Correct. You can't. It becomes quite late at that point.
Uh-huh.
Building up that pool of applicants, people who want to do it, and many, of course, parents and areas who are terrible schools, they're very frustrated, and many people want to leave and move out of it, try and find those opportunities for their children. But with better choice, and we're seeing it very clearly in other states that have had choice established for a while, that the overall education, not only in private schools, but public schools also improve as well. Mm-hmm. So you really are building that up, that knowledge, that capability, and then you're opening up opportunities in so many ways with education. And people can actually see and then actually develop the confidence that they can achieve higher. I see that with a couple of medical assistants who have worked for me in past years. They didn't have confidence because the public school education they had wasn't a particularly good one. As we taught them more about medicine, they got to see it. Their confidence started to rise, and they decided, like, okay, now they can have a career in medicine, but much later than they otherwise would have. You're quite right. Building up the education early on, the STEM, will actually very much give them those opportunities to actually get into medicine, whether whatever profession in healthcare it is.
So there's not a way that there's no substitute for hard work.
There is none.
And merit and teaching and all the basic things that to be a scientist, which is what doctors are. Which is, for those of us who are English majors, we definitely understand why you wouldn't choose that route.
There's quite a number of people with humanities background end up going into medicine, but they still need that understanding of the science.
Right.
When someone comes into my clinic and they're not looking quite right, that's based on a lot of experience. And I look at their symptoms and then they're using that scientific knowledge. Okay, now what route are we going to go down to diagnose and treat? But it's a combination of a variety of things, but it takes a long time and experience. If you see someone who looks sick and you don't have a good enough background, you're guessing at how to treat them. But once you see...
And we see a lot of that with doctors.
Oh, we do. There's always this idea that with just artificial intelligence and the right algorithm, you can just plug and play a patient with a medical professional and then you can magically come to the outcome. Medicine doesn't work that way. And a simple example is in many languages, they use the term for illness is a little bit different. Well, how do you feel? You have a stomach ache, chest pain. Says, well, I'm fatigued. Fatigued in one language means tired. Fatigued in another language might actually mean fever or some other constitutional problem. A common one in many Asian languages is the term dizzy. Mm-hmm. That is a English translation from other words. Particularly I see it in Korean, where the original word really might mean fatigue, but how they translate it into English is dizzy. Mm-hmm. Well, this is where experience comes in. Okay, is it really dizzy, vertigo versus lightheaded, and then start working on it. That all is it's part based on human interaction, the experience that's needed in the whole training program and residency, as well as then the scientific understanding. What's going on in the body that might show up in symptoms one way versus the other. So it's a long process, but that's what everyone expects when they come in to see me. They expect that I've done my homework.
So when you think about reforming medical schools, I mean, one of the things that we saw at UT Southwestern is DEI programs in place, recruiting students, but only having special programs only recruiting black students. We managed to shut those programs down in the best DEI bill in the country and now the best governance reform bill in the country in regular universities. Should it be different at medical schools? Should we just go in and try next session to shut down those DEI offices? Or is there... in the process of becoming a student at a medical school, might there be some justification for dividing people into groups based on race, ethnicity, or gender, or do we just say, okay, everything that's in 37 applies to you? Absolutely, everyone should have the same standards. It makes no sense to break up in different ways. If you change the colors, you'd be hearing things that were said in different ages when there was various types of segregation. And you don't want to do that. You want to make certain everyone gets to those same standards because they have to take the same licensing exams.
They have to meet the same medical standards because physiology doesn't change. And so bringing people up and giving them opportunities who may be more disadvantaged, it takes a little while to get to that point. But, originally affirmative action was meant to go out and give people opportunities, but it ends up devolving into a essentially statistics race game. And then you actually dumb down the standards. Well, you don't want to do that. You want to keep the standards high. And a very important point, going back to the education reform, is you can raise students up. There's such a prevalence in universities to dumb things down. You can give everyone an A, but did they earn it? Students, when you expect more students, it gets better. You can talk up to patients. You don't have to talk down to them. You have to talk up with students. You can bring them up. And we should be doing that rather than focusing on the race to try and just meet, a racial quotas, as they used to say. And they used to do that. Well, they still do it. We're trying to stop them from doing that.
We passed a law this session that required insurance reciprocity for insurance companies had to pay if they paid for sex change operations, they had to pay for reversals. What do you think about that, and why did we need that? Is there a lot of that? Or
I like that idea, and part of it is you're holding people accountable for throwing money out there by encouraging people to. They call it gender affirming care, and as a friend of mine says, that's not a great phrase. Why do you use it? Because every time I use it, it's an opportunity to explain us wrong. And so when you actually look at the real research, when you look at people who go through these various, especially young people, when they do sex change operations, there is an extremely high amount of regret, and it does not help. It actually hurts. And in fact, a study in England was being done by people who were for this and realized the data was showing them that they were quite wrong. So if an insurance company is offering to pay for a sex change operation and someone finds out this was not the solution to their problems, then they have to pay for it to come back. Otherwise, they've trapped them. They've biologically, surgically forced them into basically a sex transition ideology. And that, especially doing that to children, is just utter harm. As Dr. Goldfarb says, he calls it criminal. I think he's quite right.
And hopefully we would get to a point where people would pay attention to what's happened in Europe and just realize that that's malpractice to do those operations.
It is malpractice. Legally, malpractice is two things. It's causing harm and doing the wrong thing. If you do the wrong thing but it doesn't cause any harm, it is mock next. Sometimes you try and do the right thing and it doesn't work, like an antibiotic causes an allergic reaction. But this clearly meets that malpractice. It violates everything that the Hippocratic Oath stands on because it's forcing someone biologically to fit into someone else's ideology. And J.K. Rowling had a great quip. In Scotland, they tried to arrest her for speaking her mind, which was quite shocking. And her phrase about it, when they pulled the research, they didn't want to publish it because it showed that the gender affirming was a facade.
Right.
And she said, she quoted them as saying, "So we must not publish a study that says we're harming children because people who say we're harming children could use that study to say we're harming children. It makes it harder for us to harm children." She's rather clever. She should write books. She's quite good at it. But it very much, especially going after children who haven't developed yet, Dr. Goldfarb was quite right and quite eloquent about it.
And yet we're still having these debates. They were on other legislation over the weekend, still debating about transgenderism here in the U.S., even though there's no data here that shows the threat to suicide not true, the threat of suicide, that people with the same profiles.
Right, and the suicide rate is actually higher amongst people after they've done a sex change transition.
Wow.
And attempts is much, much higher. What they call suicidal ideation, thinking about it, is up as high as 80% in a study I saw about 10 years ago.
Right.
So it's really quite high. And many of the medical societies have actually said various things that are equivocal or even supportive. In fact, the American Association of Pediatrics is actually supporting what they call gender-affirming care. But Pediatric Society also says kids under the age of 18 shouldn't get tattoos because it's permanent change. So they've been intimidated by bullying tactics and so forth, and that's a large part of this, the bullying. And one of the spokesmen for the Pediatric Association recently this actually had to do with children COVID vaccines. That's a whole other podcast on COVID. Said we shouldn't make changes quickly because there's been a consensus of societies. A consensus of a handful of societies is not medical evidence. It's opinion. And they are saying that because they've been bullied into it. So consensus by a bunch of old guard oligarchs, well, that's why we had a revolution.
Absolutely. Well, last question is this. So you've been in Texas. So you were at Fort Bliss, then you decided to stay. So how long have you been in Texas?
2011.
So quite a while here.
Quite a while.
So if, based on your practice in primary care and your unique approach to medicine, if you were to be put in charge of all of Texas medical schools tomorrow, what would you do? What are the first 2 or 3 changes that you would institute?
One is maintain the clear standards. And I think a good medical ethics education is a part of it based on clear classical standards. So classical education would show that. And the Hippocratic Oath is a part of that. And then we have very good idea of what a good curriculum in medicine is like. And in the first year, medical science, the second year, I call it medical science gone bad. The pathology, learning the medications, and then starting rotations. Then in the third and fourth year is when someone leaves the classroom and is in the clinic or hospital full time in all the various different specialties, from pediatrics, internal medicine, surgery, and so forth. So those standards are pretty clear. It's just getting away some of this fluff that's actually come in and is hindering what has been a very good education for a long time. My grandmother called medicine the last medieval profession because it's very much a long journey, because it takes a long time developing that foundation, developing a more experience under leadership, then getting a little more freedom with less leadership until finally someone's actually now a full physician and actually practicing independently. The standards are there. We just need to restore it.
Well, we have a lot of work to do.
We have a little bit of work to do.
I'm so glad you're in Texas to help us.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'm so glad you joined me today on the podcast, and so glad that all of you joined me. You can subscribe to the Sherry Sylvester Show at Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on X at Sylvester1630. And if you'd like to receive my 9th in Congress newsletter, which includes my weekly list of winners and losers, you can sign up at the TPPF website, www.texaspolicy.com/9th in Congress. See you next time.